Carolyn Doobie here. What's the play for today? Well, today's play involves some inspiration that came from the streets of San Francisco. Now, not the actual streets, but the TV show that starred Michael Douglas many moons ago. So at some point when I was a kid, I was watching a rerun of this, and someone was taken hostage. And they had the ransom note, the demand, and it was all these funny cutout letters all glued together the way, I guess an old school good ransom note is. And that has stuck with me through all these years. I've loved ransom notes for that reason, just because they look fun and they're kind of wonky. So I've created a stencil inspired by that, where each letter is just a little bit different, and then I am actually going to use it in this video to show you how to make a ransom note inspired card like this one using some gel prints. So I'm going to use a gel press plate, and I'm going to show you how I make the pattern papers and then how to quickly and easily make a card like this. Well, I want lots of color and no white space quickly, so I'm going to start with papers that already have one layer of a solid color on it. I've got a stack of stencils over here from StencilGirl Products, and I'm going to start just getting some color and pattern on these. My goal is not to make a perfectly pretty print. My goal is to make a whole lot of pattern and color. And if you're brand new to gel printing, what you do is you just put some acrylic paint on there, and then you brayer it around. How much paint do you put on? What's too much, too little? It's all personal preference, and there's no wrong way to do it. I'm going to clean that brayer off there on a piece of scrap paper. I'm going to put a stencil on there. This one's called Trio of Thorns that I designed for StencilGirl. And then I'm just going to start taking some some pattern with it. Not the whole thing, just partial bits and pieces here. I would like to tell you that there is some rhyme or reason to what I'm doing, but there isn't. I'm just grabbing different pieces of paper and letting it layer up. Some layers I'm gonna love, and some layers I go, it just needs some more on top of it. The goal for me again here is just about getting pattern layered up. Because what we're gonna do is once we have some papers is then just stencil the ransom alphabet right on top of it. So as I add the next color here, notice the paper that I'm cleaning the brayer off on. That's going to start to build up into something wonderful too. So no paint is ever wasted, no color is ever not used when you're playing around with a gel press plate. Now this way of playing is absolutely fabulous when you want to get out of your head, because you have to move quickly enough that the paint doesn't dry, so that means you can't be all deep and thoughtful about every decision that you make. You just need to grab a piece of paper that's next to you and start putting it on there. Now I'm only putting bits and pieces of the stencil on each one because I want to let things build up. I want a variety of pattern and color on each one, so to make that happen, I'm going to put some of each one of these and all the different colors on here. Now I've taken a bunch of prints this way. Now what I'm going to do is lift up the stencil, and as soon as I did that, I could tell there was all this wonderful color and pattern on there. So I actually grabbed a fresh piece of paper, and I'm going to take one pull with just this, and I'm going to get this vintage aged kind of look, this sort of weathered look to it with little bits of the pattern in there. So every now and then when you're gel printing, if you notice some wonderful color building up, you may want to take one of those prints all by itself. Now I've also got paint on the back side of the stencil, so why waste that? I'm going to push it right down onto the brayer cleaning paper, and I'm going to transfer some of that print over that way. So what kind of paints are best to use on a gel plate? Well, I say whatever kind of acrylic paint you've got is the best kind to use. But the kind that I'm using today, and it's not the only kind by a long shot that can be used on a gel press plate, is I've got Amsterdam Standard acrylics. I think I've also got a Liquitex Basics somewhere around here. I've got some Plaza Art. Any of those paints, they have a really nice thickness, consistency, texture to it. But the real big question for me is, do I like the color? That's really how I make my decisions about paint. Alright, so this time I'm playing around with the Triangular Pathway stencil, and it gives a different kind of pattern than what the other ones had. So this is a little smaller pattern, got a little different vibe to it, and in the orange it's really popping and standing out. Well, okay, it was on the turquoise color, but against the hot pink, you can barely see it. But it is building up some layers, and pattern will add some depth to it. Now again, something as light as yellow, the orange is really going to pop on that thing. And again, notice I'm just doing little bits and pieces of the pattern as opposed to the whole thing at once, because what I'm looking for is some variety of both color and pattern on each one of these papers. So how do I decide how much paint to put onto a gel plate? Well, Part of it's habit, and part of it is based on what gives me the look that I want. If I put more paint on it, then I can take more pulls with it. It makes sense, there's more paint. So as I do this, you can see I've gotten one impression here. I can go and get some more paint off of it. So for me, since I like to get multiple pulls, I tend to use more paint. And by the way, you might be wondering why I'm kind of pushing into this, why I'm using the palm or the heel of my hand, that kind of thing. That's because on a detailed stenciler where you have a smaller area, sometimes I have to push the paper in there so that it can get into those smaller areas. If I'm using a really heavy cardstock, which I'm not here, sometimes I can't get the paper to go in there when it's a more detailed or delicate stencil. So just know if you're having any trouble picking up the image this way, you may just need to kind of rub it in there a little bit more, use the palm of your hand, the tips of your fingers, that kind of thing to really push the paint in. Now I know that my paint is getting close to drying out there, so as I lift up the stencil, I am just going to take one big cleanup pull on this. So now you've got an idea of how you can create your own customized pattern papers using a gel plate. Now if you're brand new to this and want a little more detail and how to get started with it, I've got a making your first gel print video for you, and there'll be a link down below so you can check that out. Alright, so I'm going to pick the print that I want to use, and I'm going to grab the stencil. Now the stencil's 9 by 12 and the paper is 8.5 by 11, so they don't fit perfectly. Well, here's my solution to that. I'm going to turn the print. Rather than trying to get all of it on there, I'm actually only going to get 4 of the lines on here. And what that's going to mean is that Y and Z are not going to be printed. Now, I don't use Y and Z that often, so that's not a big sweat to me. But you'll notice on the far right, there is some empty space. What that's going to be is an extra strip of colored paper that I'm going to save, so anytime I need another letter, I have that piece of paper ready to go. So if I need a Y or I need a different letter, I have that little backup bit of colored paper to use. So what's the secret and the trick to getting a crisp stenciling here? Well, the first thing is to use the very fancy tool, this cosmetic sponge from the drugstore. The other thing is to go in an up and down motion. If you go side to side, that kind of forces the paint underneath it. But there's one other trick to making sure that you get a crisp image. Now this paper that I'm going to use was actually one of the brayer cleanup pages, because sometimes those become wonderful all by themselves. And I'm turning it again, that way I get the best color, the most color on the letters that I'm going to use. So good old Y and Z, well, you know, I'll just use some of that leftover strip on the side if I need to do those. So what's the other trick to making sure that you get a crisp, wonderful stenciling? Is to either use a very thick paint like a heavy body paint, or if you're using a more fluid paint or runnier paint, to use a very small amount of paint. So if you've got a more fluid paint, what you want to do is make sure you really pounce off that cosmetic sponge on something else so there's not a lot of paint on it. Because shockingly, wet stuff does run, so if you've got a lot of juicy wet paint all over the sponge, it's probably going to run underneath your stencil. And what's the trick to making thin paint into thick paint? Just leave it out and let it start drying out a little bit and then come back to it. Because as the water evaporates, the paint will naturally thicken up. The big challenge, the trick to it, is to make sure you come back before it's completely dry. So now I've got my alphabet stenciled, now it's time to cut them up. Now there's no precise cutting here, so never fear that. I've already cut the ends off the papers. Those are those excess strips so that if I need to do a Y or a Z, I can do that. Now the nice part about these letters is they're spaced fairly far apart so that you've got the space to just cut them out. Quick and easy, cutting each letter apart. Now I don't know what word or words I want to spell, which is why I just did a bunch of these, so I'll have some choices. If I knew exactly what word I wanted to do, I could have just stenciled the 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever letters I needed, rather than doing the whole alphabet. But shockingly, I don't actually know what words I'm going to do, so I need the entire alphabet. Now, I have to tell you, it's a little embarrassing for how long it took me to decide which word I wanted to do. So I didn't make you sit around and watch me kind of fiddle around with the alphabet that way. But now that I know what word I want, now I need to trim down the letters to fit the space that I have. Remember, they were pretty big when I cut them out the first time, and now I'm going to trim them how I want to, so that they'll fit onto the card. I'm going to take a little bit here, a little bit there, kind of like giving them little haircuts and trim ups. And I have the ability to make them exactly, precisely every one the same size, which so isn't going to happen with me. or to just eyeball each one, let it be a little bit wonky. Since this is a ransom note inspired card, you know I'm going for wonky on this one. I am not going to make it everything perfectly exactly the same. That said, if doing it that way makes you happy, rock on and make it all match up perfectly. And now for the very fancy attaching of it. That's a glue stick. Yep, plain old glue stick. Could I use gel medium? Could I use double-sided tape? Absolutely. Whatever you like to use to stick stuff on, stick those letters right on, and the card is finished and ready to go. Now this was one, and I realized I'd like to make a whole set of these things because I think I might give them as a gift. So I've got the word hello, and then I decided to channel my inner teenager, and I was kind of thinking would I do like OMG? Or that kind of thing, and I ended up going with thanks and then roll on the floor laughing. Now, at least that's what I think this stands for, but then again, I'm not 18, 16, 14, 12, so for all I know, it stands for something completely different. And my daughter who's watching me just gave me the nod yes of, yes, mother, it does stand for roll on floor laughing. So yay, I'm feeling all hip and trendy in that nerd mom kind of way. Well, thanks for joining me for today's play. If you've been enjoying this video, I'd so appreciate you giving it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, hit that subscribe button. That way you'll know as soon as I have a new video out. Now, the fun doesn't have to end here. You can find more play over on the blog at acolorfuljourney.com, where I've got a free newsletter with a downloadable video and PDF waiting for you once you've joined up, as well as a free workshop called Permission to Play. Thank you for letting me be a part of your colorful journey.